Why were Africa's leaders noticeably absent from Donald Trump's second inauguration as the 47th President of the United States? On January 20th, 2025, the world watched Trump take office for a second term, but something was missing. No African leaders were invited. While the event saw dignitaries from various countries worldwide, the absence of any African representation was hard to ignore. Normally, U.S. presidential inaugurations focus on domestic matters. Still, Trump made an unusual choice by inviting several foreign leaders, leaving Africa out of the guest list and sparking questions about the continent's place in his vision for the future. This absence sent a strong and unmistakable message. Africa was not a priority for the new administration. Many questioned whether this was a deliberate snub or a strategic move, but Trump has recently spoken out, explaining the reasoning behind his decision. In this video, we'll analyze Trump's rationale and, more importantly, what African leaders should take away from this bold statement. In the lead-up to Trump's inauguration, leaders from African nations like Nigeria and Mozambique reportedly sought invitations, eager to be part of the event. A New York Post article from January 11, 2025, titled, "Foreign Leaders Desperately Jockeying for Invite to Trump's Inauguration," described a frenzy among global leaders trying to secure a spot. A registered foreign agent even noted that leaders from Chile, Peru, Nigeria, and Mozambique clamored to attend. Yet, despite this apparent eagerness, no African leader was included.
In what was arguably the most unusual inauguration in American history, President Donald Trump pledged that the golden age for the country had just begun. He promised to make America great again, while he also used his inauguration address to lay out a series of executive actions that his administration would undertake, especially on immigration, energy, and trade. However, what was missing in his nearly 30-minute-long inauguration address was the mention of Africa, which happened to be mentioned a total of 0 times.
Instead, Trump's guest list was filled with figures like Argentina's Javier Milei, Italy's Giorgia Meloni, Hungary's Viktor Orban, and even China's Xi Jinping. This wasn't a random decision, but a strategic choice favoring leaders aligned with Trump's worldview. The selection of invitees reflected Trump's emphasis on nationalist leaders and those who have openly supported his policies or shared his ideological leanings. Even China's presence at the inauguration, despite ongoing tensions with the U.S., signals Trump's willingness to engage selectively based on strategic interest rather than traditional diplomatic norms.
Now, Africa has generally been low on the priority list for the United States for years. Last year, former President Joe Biden had made a trip to Angola to show that the U.S. was shifting its perspective and attention to Africa. Still, he was not successful.
For African leaders, this exclusion sends a strong message. Trump has never hidden his indifference toward the continent, and this latest move only reinforces the perception that Africa remains low on Washington's list of priorities. During his first term, Trump made his stance on Africa abundantly clear, often with controversial and offensive remarks. His administration showed little interest in fostering relationships with African nations, prioritizing other regions he considered more valuable. In 2018, he infamously referred to African nations in derogatory terms, sparking global outrage, and his administration largely disengaged from African affairs beyond a few military and economic interests. Now, with his return to power, that approach remains unchanged. This deliberate exclusion serves as a stark reminder of how Africa is frequently overlooked in global politics and treated as an afterthought, while other regions receive attention and investment. It highlights a broader pattern where African nations, despite their vast resources and economic potential, are often sidelined by major powers unless a direct strategic interest is at play. Trump's attitude toward Africa hasn't changed. Like most Western leaders, he doesn't see the continent as a priority. But whether you like him or not, there's one thing he said that African leaders can't afford to ignore. He said, if, after 50 years of independence, you still haven't built the infrastructure your people need, what does that say about your leadership? How can a continent so rich in gold, diamonds, oil, and uranium still have nations where people struggle for basic necessities? It's not just about resources, it's about priorities. Africa holds some of the world's most valuable commodities, yet much of its wealth benefits foreign corporations and a handful of elites rather than the millions living in poverty. Trump didn't stop at criticism. He called out the deeper issue. If leaders hold on to power only to buy weapons, oppress their citizens, and steal from public funds, how can they expect the world to respect them? If they continue to sell out their own countries for personal gain while their people suffer, is that leadership or betrayal? Some may dismiss Trump's words as blunt or even offensive, but they force an uncomfortable truth into the open. The West has long exploited Africa, yes, but it's also true that African leaders have enabled it. Many have worked with foreign interests, trading their nation's futures for personal wealth, leaving their economies weak and their people desperate. And this isn't just a thing of the past. It's happening right now. While the world races toward a future of economic power shifts, AI dominance, and geopolitical realignments, too many African leaders are still trapped in the same old cycle, allowing foreign powers to extract gold and resources while their own infrastructure crumbles. Do African leaders feel any shame when they visit Western nations and witness advanced infrastructure, cutting-edge technology, and thriving economies? Do they ever stop to question why their own countries remain so far behind? It's a bitter truth, one that Trump didn't hesitate to point out. Western nations often look down on Africa, seeing it as a continent plagued by poverty, corruption, and disease. And while colonial exploitation played a role in shaping this image, much of the blame now falls squarely on the shoulders of Africa's leaders. Trump's words still echo. If you brutalize your own people, if you treat them like they're nothing, how can you expect the world to respect them? Leadership is supposed to be about building nations, empowering citizens, and securing a better future. But too many African leaders have chosen personal enrichment over progress. Public funds meant for healthcare, education, and infrastructure vanish into offshore accounts, leaving hospitals in disrepair, roads crumbling, and millions of young Africans without hope. Even worse, some of these stolen billions are frozen by Western governments, ensuring that the very people they were stolen from never see a dime. And the consequences? A continent where patriotism is fading fast. Young people see no future in their homelands, forcing them to risk their lives in search of opportunities abroad. Many never make it, perishing in the deserts, drowning in the Mediterranean, or falling into the hands of human traffickers. This cycle of despair is no accident. It is the direct result of weak, corrupt, and visionless leadership. Yes, the West has exploited Africa, but how long will African leaders use that as an excuse while continuing to sell out their own people? They blame external forces, but refuse to acknowledge their role in the continent's stagnation. They give speeches, make promises, and sign deals. But where is the real action? Where is the accountability? The truth is that Africa will never be taken seriously on the world stage until its leaders step up. The continent has everything it needs to thrive: resources, talent, and potential. But without real leadership, it will remain a goldmine for outsiders and a graveyard of broken dreams for its own people. The lack of respect Africa receives from the West stems from its leaders often failing to demand it. Instead of standing firm, many African leaders bow and beg for approval from Western powers, only to wonder why Africa continues to be sidelined. For example, regardless of your views on Donald Trump, his leadership strength is undeniable. His America First approach demonstrates his unwavering commitment to his country. He doesn't care about upsetting others or stepping on toes. He's focused on doing what he believes is best for the American people. The same can be said for leaders like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. They might not be infallible, but their clear dedication to their nations sets them apart. They push their national interests unapologetically, no matter how controversial their decisions may be. For Africa, the story is more complex. The West has long exploited the continent, but that alone doesn't explain the current affairs. Things won't improve until African leaders take a stand and prioritize their own nations. Some leaders are already doing just that. Military leaders in countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have been praised for their refusal to play the West's game. Instead of begging for approval, they put their countries first, show true patriotism, and lead with conviction. When you look at some African leaders today, it's clear that many fail to prioritize their own people. Take Nigeria's president, for example. His country is grappling with crippling inflation, a weakened currency, and an over-reliance on oil. Yet his focus seems to be on securing an invite to Trump's inauguration. It's hard to fathom how this could be justified when citizens back home struggle to afford necessities. It's not just disappointing, it's embarrassing. How can leaders who don't put their own people first ever expect respect on the global stage? But it's not all doom and gloom. Leaders like Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré show us a different path forward. Traoré isn't distracted by the need for foreign approval or worried about playing by the West's rules. Instead, he's focused on building a future where Burkina Faso is self-sufficient and its people's needs are the top priority. Sure, the West may label him a dictator, but sometimes a nation needs a leader willing to make tough decisions to protect its people. Someone who isn't afraid to stand firm for what's right. What sets Traoré apart is his commitment to the ideals of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader who dared to dream of an independent, self-reliant Burkina Faso. Sankara believed in the power of his people and the importance of building the nation from the ground up, free from the shackles of colonial influence. His vision wasn't just about grand speeches or symbolic gestures, but about taking action. Under Sankara, Burkina Faso achieved food self-sufficiency, launched vaccination campaigns, and made significant strides in education and healthcare, all without relying on Western aid. Sankara's approach rattled the West, who couldn't handle an African leader rejecting their influence and succeeding without their help. His alliances with nations like Cuba, North Korea, and the Soviet Union made him even more of a threat. Sankara's leadership was a direct challenge to the status quo. When his ally, Blaise Compaoré, betrayed him, it wasn't just a personal loss, but a betrayal of the entire country's future. Compaoré's actions reversed the progress made under Sankara, turning Burkina Faso back into a puppet state controlled by foreign interests. This isn't just the story of Burkina Faso. Across Africa, we've seen leaders prioritize personal power and wealth over the well-being of their people. They've worked with external forces to destabilize their nations, perpetuating a cycle of dependency. But things don't have to stay this way. Recent leaders like Ibrahim Traoré have reignited the hope of a truly independent Africa. Traoré's rise signals a shift, a rejection of the exploitation by Western powers, and a clear focus on what's best for the people of Burkina Faso. His leadership proves that African nations don't have to follow the path of submission and weakness. They can stand firm, make tough decisions, and prioritize the needs of their citizens. But for that to happen, it requires more leaders to step up with the same courage, discipline, and commitment to their people. Imagine if more African leaders followed Sankara's example, resisting the temptation of greed and foreign influence, and choosing to put their nations first. The potential for Africa is limitless, but it starts with leaders prioritizing the people over power. Africa's future will depend on leaders who are willing to defy the pressures of external forces and put their nations on a path of self-sufficiency, growth, and true independence. The change will come when the continent's leaders embrace the ideals of Sankara and refuse to settle for anything less than what's best for their people. If that happens, Africa could stand proudly and confidently on the world stage, no longer seeking permission or approval from the West. What do you think? Which African leaders are ready to change the narrative about the continent and its future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this message compelling, be sure to give it a thumbs up, share it with others, subscribe to our channel, and turn on post notifications for more thought-provoking content. Thanks for watching.